Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Emhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, YouTube at Hawk Blogger. And as you can see, today you find me in lovely Palm Springs. I am poolside. Technically, I'm actually hot tub side. And going to get in a quick show today before I enjoy the rest of my day with my fam. So I'm going to get right to it. Thanks for everybody who's tuning in. Hopefully you can hear me okay with the jets going in the background and all that good stuff. Um, what I wanted to do is I've been working on a kind of a project on the side. I have not fully completed it to my liking, but I'm going to share where I'm at with it, which is, we talk a lot about the draft and we talk about free agency and we talk about where there's availability and we talk about adding to strengths. I think obviously this all has to come back to first looking at your roster, where the roster is, and where it's got needs, where it should grow, and where it's already strong. Some of this is probably stuff that most people think they already know. Personally, when I sit down and I look at it, it's a little less obvious. And so what I wanted to do is share a little bit of what I've found so far and hear from you, what your perspectives are as well as we get into all of this. So um, a good way to kind of think about this is I'm not only going to be talking about needs in terms of, hey, is this an area where we have nobody that can play? It's a look at where the Seahawks have players that you can't really improve from is one lens to look at. You already are top of the league in that category. And in that regard, you pretty much can say there's not a position group where the Seahawks couldn't get better if they found somebody who was a Pro Bowl, all pro level player, because the Seahawks had one Pro Bowler and no all pros this year. So on one side of this, I would just encourage everyone to realize there's really not a position where if you drafted or added a player who was very good, that the Seahawks wouldn't be better. That's just the reality. They are not the Eagles right now. They have not had a season where everything's come together, where they've been able to have a number of dominant players. And so if you want to really simplify it, you can just say, yeah, anywhere you can get a great player, add a great player. Within that, I think it's important to talk about positional value. And so I'll talk about that a little bit. From there, I'm going to look at this with a lens of I'm going to assume some attrition from free agency. So unrestricted free agents. I'll talk to you about which ones I assume for this exercise are not going to be back. And then I'm going to also talk about some cap casualties that we've talked about a lot. I'm going to assume that they are not going to be here. And so we'll talk about that as we get into the different position groups. I could go position by position, and in some cases I might. But in general, for brevity, I'm probably going to focus on groups. So I'll probably focus on, cornerbacks as opposed to nickel cornerback and outside corner, boundary corner, that kind of thing. But I'm going to violate that right at the jump and talk about a position that is an interesting one, quarterback. You've got Geno Smith, who is very likely going to be extended. Joel Corey, myself, Jeff Simmons, I think all have the same rough idea in mind. It's probably going to be a 3-year deal that is guaranteed realistically for 2 years. And so you then have Sam Howell, who's a young quarterback and who's your backup and who is under contract for 1 more year under his rookie deal. If you were to look at this is another way to look at positional needs. If you were to look at this as a 1 year time horizon, the need at the quarterback position is low. It's low. The Seahawks, I know a lot of people would have a different opinion, but from a realistic point of view, the Seahawks are well appointed at the quarterback position for this coming season, one way or another. Where things get interesting is if you look at the 3-year time horizon. And a lot of NFL GMs, most NFL GMs, I think, plan their rosters based off of 3-year time horizons. And with that in mind, that position group becomes essentially the number one need of all the positions on your roster. It's the highest positional value. It is one where you very likely are you're not set up to have a starter in 3 years, and you need to start finding that replacement. So in that regard, quarterback is either this is where it gets challenging. It's either one of your least positions of need or it's your highest position of need. And I think this is where there'll be a lot of debate that continues to rage among Seahawks fans about where it fits on that spectrum. Assuming that the Seahawks are looking at it from a 3-year perspective, I think that they're going to look at this and say, really, for the next 2 years, we're in good shape. This is probably a medium need. Like, I think it's a little bit above the mid. I think they would love to add a quarterback in the draft this year if they can find one that they like. But I don't think that this is the top need on their board. I don't think this is going to be something that they're going to be moving heaven and earth to find. I personally am still a big advocate of a move like for someone like Joe Milton, who I think is a better prospect than almost any of the quarterbacks in this draft and could be had for a draft pick that's probably a lot less than what you'd have to spend on some of these guys that are coming out. So I would expect the Seahawks to make this a priority, but not a top priority this offseason. I don't think it's a make a move at any cost kind of position. Next on this list, I'm going to hop around a little bit to some of the groups I've had the most interesting. Let's talk about defensive line, and let's specifically talk about interior defensive line. What you've got going on there right now is Byron Murphy. You've got Leonard Williams, both under contract, and you've got Mike Morris. All right. From there, you've got Roy Robertson Harris, who is currently under contract. A lot of people are saying that he's going to be cut. My current expectation is he has, I think, a $6.5 million cap hit. None of it's guaranteed, a salary. None of it's guaranteed for this year. He's not in a position of high leverage there. I think he'd like to stay in Seattle. I would bet that they renegotiate that down into like the $3 million territory and that he sticks around. He's a valuable player on this roster. I don't think that they would have traded for him, have him contribute, even though he got fewer snaps at the end of the year. My current expectation is he is going to be part of this roster next year. So I'm kind of including him in that defensive interior evaluation of positional need. Jaron Reed, who's an unrestricted free agent, I am going to make a controversial assumption that he is not going to be back. All right. So I'm going to judge this in that regard. Jonathan Hankins, who is also an unrestricted free agent, I'm going to assume he is not going to be back. So with that in mind, you've got Byron Murphy, Leonard Williams, Mike Morris, and Roy Robertson Harris as your interior defensive line. I'm not including Draymond Jones. He was an edge player primarily when the interior linemen were healthy. And once Roy Robertson Harris got back, came to the team, he pretty much was an edge player. So I'm going to assume that is your defensive tackle group. As far as ranking the need there or prioritizing the need there, I think in the 1 year time horizon, it is a low need, relatively speaking, from an overall perspective. The nose tackle position on its own is a must-have. Like, you have to find a nose tackle. You do not have that on the roster. Byron Murphy played nose tackle, but that was not the position that he was drafted to play in that regard. So nose tackle is a must-fill position. It's also one of the lower positional values. So it's a position group that they're going to have to address this offseason, undoubtedly, but they're not going to have to necessarily expend a lot to do it. And if you watched the show yesterday, went over some of the great bargains in the free agent market, there's a lot of options there, and there's a lot of options in the draft. In fact, one day after actually the same day that I posted that video yesterday, there was a lot of love coming out for Roy Lopez across the film watchers groups. And Nate Tice was out there talking about how good he is. He was one of the last guys I mentioned. I think he's a great bargain and would be an awesome nose tackle to add to this group if they found a way to do that. From the other parts of the non-nose tackle groups, if you look at that from a 3-year time horizon, I think the need becomes higher. Now, Leonard Williams is still young enough that I think he can be very productive for the next 2 to 3 years. But I think that, if you're grading this on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being a must addressed critical priority, 1 being you don't need to do anything, I think the defensive tackle position is like a 6 in that regard from a 3-year time horizon. And I think there was a great tweet yesterday from Daniel Jeremiah, who was just like, hey, if you were just admiring the Eagles' depth on their offensive and defensive line, and saying how great it is, you can't then criticize your team if they take an offensive or defensive lineman, even if you think your group is pretty good. That's been my perspective on the defensive tackle group for the Seahawks. I don't think you can have enough depth there. And so I think you should constantly, I mean, it's almost impossible for that group to not be a position of value to be drafting any year. So I rate this at around a 6 overall. Nose tackle is like a 9. You got to address it. And I think that should be an easier one to address this offseason. Next on this group, let's talk about the off-ball linebackers. Okay, well, actually, let's talk about edge. Let's talk about edge next because I think that's obviously close and close to the defensive line. So the way the Seahawks have their edge group, they have a rush edge, which number 1 on their depth chart has been Draymond Jones. Behind him has been Derek Hall. And then they have a Sam, strong side linebacker, outside linebacker. That's been Uchenna Nwosu, Boye Mafe. I am going to assume Draymond Jones is not on the roster. That is my assumption, that they are going to let him go for cap reasons. Uchenna Nwosu is a really interesting one. I've assumed he's going to be on the roster. So let's do this 2 ways. If he is on the roster, you've got Uchenna Nwosu, Boye Mafe, and Derek Hall. I think the need in a 1-year time horizon is like a 3 or a 4. It's not something you've got reasonable depth there. You've got enough rotation to be able to share snaps. I just don't see it as a pressing need. It's also a group that if you could improve it, it would be one of the biggest areas of impact on this team. So it's not a need, but it is absolutely a place where if you can find a way to upgrade, it would be one of the most valuable things you could do. So this is where there's a difference between identifying need and identifying opportunities to improve your roster. Those are 2 different things. In a 3-year time horizon, I'm not sure I see Uchenna Nwosu on this roster. I think Derek Hall and Boye Mafe should have fully developed by then. And Boye Mafe, one of the things we don't know, he's entering the last year of his deal. Will he be extended this year? If he is extended, then again, the need drops a little bit, assuming that he continues to develop. If he's not, you're potentially 1 year away from having Derek Hall on the last year of his deal and maybe not much else. So I think if you get past 1 year, this positional need becomes potentially very high, maybe one of the highest on the roster. Again, this depends heavily on how Boye Mafe and Derek Hall develop. It also depends heavily on what happens with Uchenna Nwosu and whether he returns to form as being one of the better edge players in the NFC. An overall edge player. He's not one of like the top 5 edge rushers, but from an overall positional value, he's quite a good edge player. So, right now, I think that is a 3 need from a 1-year time horizon. From a 3-year time horizon, I think that becomes like a 7 or an 8, and maybe even a 10. Next group, we are going to talk about off-ball linebackers. So Ernest Jones is currently an unrestricted free agent. I'm going to assume that they sign Ernest Jones. So with that in mind, I think this position with Tyrese Knight, and then you've got Drake Thomas, Josh Ross, who you may have forgot the Seahawks signed, Patrick O'Connell, are all on this team for depth. I think the starting unit is in good shape. I think the depth of this group is pretty thin. So I think that you've got to put this at a 6 or a 7. I think you have to add more depth to this position this offseason for competition and seeing what they have to offer, because I just don't know that they've got what they need behind those starting players. So continuing on, cornerback, you've got Devin Witherspoon, Reek Woolen, Josh Jobe, and Nehemiah Pritchett. We're going to assume that Trey Brown who's an unrestricted free agent, will not be back. So I think in a 1-year time horizon, again, you've got Reek Woolen, who is coming up on the final year of his deal. This is the last year of his deal. If he's extended, you've got one need. If he is not extended, you've got a totally different need. Josh Jobe, I think it's a little bit dangerous to assume that he's just going to be the guy you need as your third corner. I think they need to do more. So from a positional value perspective, it's a pretty high value position. It's one of the highest paid position groups. And I don't think that you can rest on your laurels here. So this is, I think, one of the most underrated positions of need for the Seahawks this season, this offseason, because one, you don't know exactly what's going to happen with Reek Woolen. Two, Josh Jobe is a question mark. Yes, he came in, he played well. I think he's going to be fine, but that's a big, big risk to take to enter the season with really no options beyond that. Now, the team seems to like Nehemiah Pritchett certainly more than I do. I did not see much from Nehemiah Pritchett that I was impressed by. I would not be comfortable having him play significant snaps in a game. And so from my perspective, this is like a 7. Like, I think you've got to add to the corner group. It's a tough offseason to do that. I don't think you're going to spend meaningful free agent dollars on this. And I don't know that you are going to, like, there's a few guys in the draft that might make sense, but I don't think it's a particularly deep group at the cornerback position. This is probably one of the trickiest positions to address for the Seahawks going into this offseason. Let me take a quick break. I know we've got a super chat. Bryce Coots has gifted 10 Hawk Blogger memberships. Thank you so much, Bryce. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for doing that. And hopefully if you get one of these free memberships, you consider paying it forward and giving it as well. All right, that's cornerback. Safety. You've got Kobe Bryant, Julian Love, and then Jarek Reed II and AJ Finley. Rayshawn Jenkins is an unrestricted. Oh, sorry, he's not an unrestricted free agent. He is in the second year of his deal. I am assuming he is not. He's going to be cut, and he is not going to be back. So I'm taking him off the roster. This is a position group that I think you could do nothing in and be okay. I think if you had to enter the season with the group you've got, I think you can find your way. Partially because I'm a believer in Jarek Reed. I think Jarek Reed's a guy that could end up being a quality third safety. Now, that's a big bet. And the Seahawks may not be willing to make that bet. They may feel like they want to add depth, and I think that they should add another safety. The question is, do you block the development of Jarek Reed by bringing in, maybe you get a 1-year deal with Talanoa Hufanga, who for both myself and Jeff was on our top 10 free agent list. Really, really talented impact player, all pro level player. Yeah, I mean, I would do that, but you have to understand you're blocking the development of a young player there, and you may be hurting yourself in the long run by not finding a cheaper option to play that position. We've seen players like Ryan Neal, Marquand Manuel back in the day. We've seen who was the other guy? Oh my gosh, the guy they traded for from the Jets. Oh no, they traded to the Jets in the Jamal Adams deal. Bradley McDougald. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, you can find these third safeties that can be impact players at a relatively affordable price. So it'd be interesting to see what they do there. But I think safety is a lower position of need. I think with Kobe Bryant and Julian Love, you're in a good position there. Now, Kobe Bryant is entering the final year of his deal as well. He's part of the same rookie class as Reek Woolen and Boye Mafe. So you're going to have to decide what you're going to do in that situation. I personally would absolutely extend Kobe Bryant because his price should be very low. You're buying low at this point in his career. He's only had half a season essentially as a starting safety. He is not a well-known commodity yet. He's young. He's talented. Extend him now. I think that's a no-brainer. I think you could do it at a very affordable price and solidify that safety position for the next few years. All right, so that's defense. We've gone through that whole defensive group. Let's get back to the offense. We did quarterback already. Let's talk about wide receiver. Wide receiver, you've got DK Metcalf, Jake Bobo, Cody White. Then you've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jalen Darden, if you don't remember, the returner, Derek Young, who's also from that draft class and entering the last year of his deal, and Tyler Lockett. I am going to assume for these purposes that Tyler Lockett is not going to be back. And if that's the case, then you really are saying, okay, are you going to give Jake Bobo the opportunity or Cody White the opportunity to step forward? And are you comfortable with that approach? Or do you want to add to that position room? For my money, I think that you can afford taking a 1-year view of that group and seeing if Jake Bobo is enough. If those guys, Cody White and Jake Bobo, can fill the role as needed. Remember, JSN can play slot or outside, and so it would allow Cody White or Jake Bobo to be your second outside receiver. I think the tight end, we'll talk about that in a second, is a better place to be adding But you're taking a big risk if you don't add anything to that receiver group after having Lockett step away. You also have the chance of potentially blocking the development of a young player in like Jake Bobo or Cordy White. So from a need perspective, this is one where I think it's catch as catch can. If you can get a guy that you like in the draft later in the draft, you do it. I don't know that it makes sense to go and use a second round pick on Jack Besh or someone like that, who I think is a really, really interesting prospect. But assuming that they're going to extend DK Metcalf, which I think is a good assumption, and that Jackson Smith and Jigba is, has 2 years this year and one more after that on his rookie deal, it's just hard to make the case that it is such a high need that you need to expend your top draft capital to address. This next position group, for my money, is where I would. Tight end. So you have Noah Fant. Pharaoh Brown is an unrestricted free agent. I believe he's an unrestricted free agent. I can double check that. But AJ Barner and Brady Russell. And the way I look at it is I think Noah Fant's going to be on the team. Personally, I wish they would move on. I think that they need someone who's a better blocker. And I don't think he's given you enough as a receiver to make up for his deficiencies as a blocker. And I think for this offense, I think he's going to be a hindrance to this offense functioning properly. So I personally would rather they move on and get that cap space and then go heavy in this tight end rich draft. I wouldn't care if they took 2 tight ends in this draft class. I think they have a chance to really shape that position for years to come. If they keep Noah Fant, which I'm guessing they're going to, then you still need to add 1 tight end to this room. I don't think you can just count on Brady Russell being your 3rd tight end. So I think this is a 7 level need in the 1 year or the 3 year time horizon. Now keep in mind, Noah Fant I think his deal was only a 2 year deal. So I think this is the last year of his deal. And then you've got AJ Barner, who is only in the 2nd year of his rookie contract. So you've got a lot of time with AJ Barner on a rookie deal. But if you could add 1 more young player to play next to Barner, then you're really setting up that position group. And I think you're helping this offense more than if you reach for a receiver this offseason. All right. Running back. You've got Kenneth Walker III, you've got Zach Charbonnet, and you've got Kenny McIntosh. You also have George Halani. And so this is one of the most well-appointed position groups on the roster. You could say it is the lowest, like one of the lowest positional values. You could say it is one of the highest in terms of talent that you've got and what you spent to get that talent on the roster. Now, you do have Kenneth Walker entering the last year of his contract. Maybe you decide you're not going to re-sign him and you continue to have cheaper running backs. I don't hate that approach. Kenneth Walker is a very unique talent. I think he is above the average running back, and I think he's harder to replace than people might expect. But you've also got Zach Charbonnet, who's shown that he can be a pretty good player when given the opportunity to start. So Kenny McIntosh had a good year. I think George Halani has a lot to offer as well. So I think this is one of the lowest need groups. It happens to be a draft where there's more great running backs than you're going to find almost in any draft. So it's a little bit challenging to just walk by a heavily supplied area, a position, and not take anybody. But I think that's most likely what you're talking about in this draft class, as you just watch them go by. Now, we've talked about fullback. The Seahawks have not really had a fullback position on their position group. That is an unfilled need. Now, they could say Brady Russell is going to fill that position, but I have to think they're going to look at free agency and the draft to actually fill that with somebody who's meant to be a fullback. And if they have competition with Brady Russell and he wins out, great. But I don't think you can just go into the season, go into the OTAs, assuming that Brady Russell is your answer at fullback. All right, now offensive line. This is not a surprise to anybody. If you look at the tackle groups, you've got Charles Cross, you've got Abe Lucas, and you've got Mike Jarrell. So it's an actual pretty thin group from a depth perspective. So the starters, Abe Lucas and Charles Cross, I think are very good. Everyone talks about the Seahawks offensive line being terrible. People talk about John Schneider being terrible at finding offensive linemen. I think the tackle position has been actually a pretty good position group for him over his tenure. And I think that they're in decent shape there. Now, could Abe Lucas have, or, something come back with his injury? Could he get injured again? Sure. That could happen. I think that Mike Jarrell is raw but talented as a backup. George Fant is a guy that I am assuming they are not going to bring back. I've got him off the roster. Stone Forsythe is an unrestricted free agent. I've got him not coming back. So I do think there's a need for a swing tackle. That could be a veteran. That could be someone that they draft, like a Chris Trapillo. Is it Chris Trapillo? I think it's. I'm going to do a quick look. Chris Trapillo. No. Kid from Boston College. Ozzy Trapillo. Sorry. Ozzy Trapillo would be an ideal swing tackle from my perspective if they were to add someone like him. So tackle is it's an interesting one. It's such a critical position. You're pretty well appointed. You do have Charles Cross coming to the last year of his deal. I think that they'll either give him the 5th-year option or they'll sign him to extension, so he's not going anywhere. I think Abe Lucas, they're going to probably want to see him play, and I think they won't necessarily talk about an extension until during the season. If you want to be ballsy and you want to get the best price possible, you sign him to a short-term extension right now. His value is the lowest it's going to be. You sign him to a 3-year deal that's really 2 years in guarantees. And if it turns out that he gets injured again, you put guarantees in there. You put some of the escalators in there related to play time and games played. And so the contract can scale up or down. The Seahawks do this a lot. I think you have a chance to get him at the lowest price you're going to get him. I personally would sign him, and then you don't have the tackle position in a question mark unless he gets injured. We'll see what the Seahawks choose to do. I think the best expectation is that they'll probably let him play into the season before making the call. I think every game, every milestone you let move, the less likely he's going to sign a team-friendly deal. Now, guard, we're going in position by position on offensive line. Guard is a position group where you're talking about having Satoa Laumea, Christian Haynes, and that's it. Is that it? I have to pull up the Seahawks roster because now I'm doubting my work here. Is that really it? 1 second, folks. So, Satoa Laumea, Christian Haynes, Anthony Bradford. Sorry, Anthony Bradford is also on the roster. I knew there was someone that was missing from my list. Now, of course, we would all maybe that's a Freudian slip that he was not on my list, but he technically is on the roster. And then I'm looking to make sure that I didn't miss anybody else. Yeah. Okay. So, again, your guards, Satoa Laumea, Christian Haynes, Anthony Bradford. Laken Tomlinson is an unrestricted free agent, and I don't expect him back. If they do bring him back, I would expect him to be as a backup. This position group is interesting, folks. I mean, I think we'd all say it's a 10. You might not need just one player. You might need 2 players at this group. At the same time, Satoa Laumea and Christian Haynes could absolutely earn starting roles. And so you could have a Matt Flynn, Russell Wilson kind of situation where maybe you go and spend meaningful money on a free agent, and then your rookies end up being guys, or your second-year players or third-year players end up being the guys that you want to take those roles. And so that's not the worst-case scenario. But I'm probably one of the only people that will tell you I think that the Seahawks have a chance to have 2 young quality guards. And I think that, yes, you can't go into the season with that as your expectation, but I have higher belief that these guys can turn into something meaningful than I think the average Seahawks fan or analyst out there. So for me, this still is a 10 out of 10 positional need. It's just critical that you add to this group. I also think it is, of the groups we've talked about, there's some upside here that isn't available for some of these other groups. Christian Haynes was a guy that really got a raw deal last year, and under this new regime could see a massive jump in his second season. So I think he's just an interesting one to watch in particular. At the center position, last position, you've got Oluwatimi and Jalen Sundell. Now, this is probably the toughest position group of every on the roster to really assess because you just don't know what the Seahawks feel about these players. The implication is that they like Oluwatimi, but I think they like Jalen Sundell quite a bit. This is a guy that made it out of North Dakota State, by the way, where Gray Zabel plays, and made it as an undrafted free agent, got on the field for some plays, had some good moments when he did get on the field, has played out to tackle for them. So he is an athletic, moving guy. Could be a very good fit for his own blocking scheme. He played some fullback as well. So I just don't know that the Seahawks feel that their roster at the center position is a big need. I think this is probably like if they find somebody that fits, if they get a Gray Zabel, as Daniel Jeremiah is now predicted to go to the Seahawks at 18 overall, which is a little rich. I think they could be looking at Gray Zabel as a center as much as a guard. And he could be one of the few guys that could play center and be a puller in a zone run scheme. So, guys like Creed Humphrey, there's very few guys that can do what someone like a Gray Zabel could do at the center position. So I think it's catch as catch can at center. I think that they absolutely could go into the season next year with exactly the guys they've got there to play center, knowing that Christian Haynes also provides a little bit of depth if they choose. He's taken snaps there. If they want him to have an option to play center, they could. But I think this is one of the groups that has one of the hardest to predict aspects of the team, which probably means it's not a high need for them. I think people are going to take Clint Kubiak's comments about wanting an elite center, meaning that they're going to go sign Drew Dahlman. We've certainly talked about that. I know that's where Rob Staten is and some other folks. I'm not convinced that the Seahawks are going to go spend top dollar when I think they feel like they might have some guys on their roster who are good enough starters. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens there. We'll learn a lot in doing it. I'm not going to go over punter and kicker and all that stuff. But with that in mind, I just wanted to say thank you all for tuning in. That will do it for this edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am going to go do my morning workout and then hit the hot tub, play a little golf later today. So I'm looking forward to the rest of my day. I hope you are looking forward to the rest of yours as well. Give the show a like, click subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it. Until the next time, I'm Brian Nemhauser. This has been episode 331 straight days of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care, folks.